There is another matrix that we haven't heard much about, and this is where it started, and this is where it will end. Here's where we are again in our akasha back here. There is our parallel akasha, which would be this one, I think. It's either this one or this one. It depends on which way things are spinning, and I have to analyze the diagrams again to figure out. But it's either this one or this one, depending on which way the spin is going on this. I will call it, oh yeah, all right, I'll call it that one. All right. Thank you. Thank you. See, they don't like to just say, here, tell them this, it's this. They show me, because then I can show you, and then I know, and it makes sense, rather than just saying, oh, well, they said it's this, or whatever. So we tend to not just do that, but they just did that because we're in a hurry. So here is our parallel akasha system. Here's our akasha system. Now, the akashas themselves are not falling. It's only the smaller Ecka and Veca systems within them. If they were all light balls within the bigger light ball of the akasha, it is only the smaller Veca systems that are falling when we talk about the fall. So we have our akasha, we have our parallel akasha. Parallel akasha, a very, very long time ago, went through an experience very similar to what our Veca is going through now, our Ecka-Veca is going through now. This is where the first mess occurred that culminated in our mess and in their mess. Yeah. Over in the parallel akasha, there was, I should put now the first of the timeline bit up. No, just because they just gave me this stuff on dates and stuff. So I want to not accidentally say the wrong ones. I think that's the one I need. Yes. Yeah. What I need to do is actually put it on like where I can see that, so I can point to that, but also see the dates. Yeah. One of those. Now we're going to understand a little bit of the history, so you understand the players in the game now, because this is what we are dealing with now, and these are also going to be names that you will see have to do directly with what we call the Victimizer Game that is running on this planet and that is being pushed by off-planet forces to try to create what appears to be a holy war between the Christians and the Muslims. And the Christians aren't doing it and the Muslims aren't doing it. It's being moved through them, and they're being manipulated into creating a drama based on defending their gods. And this is why understanding some of this history and some of these names and at least a roundabout understanding of the Ecka-Veca maps will give you an idea of what this planet is in. We're not just joking when we say it is in a huge, massive drama. It is huge. We're not just talking about one universe. We're talking about what is called a tri-matrix system, where you have 3 matrices involved, 3 akasha matrices. That's big. This is where the mess started. That's not going to work, is it? Can you just... Yep. Yeah, it's only this one that I need, right? Yeah, that's good. And then if we can bring this one up next to it. Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right. Now, these are things they're putting back into... pardon the misspellings. They're probably all over the place. Yeah, because they're just like whipping through it, trying to get it at least typeset, because if this was in longhand, those of you who have seen me make mylars of my longhand stuff, why bother? Because you can't read it and I can't either. So they had me typeset this. This is how they gave me the information we needed to talk about today. They have been mentioning since July, little bits about this group called the Borgia, little bits about this, little bits about that. I had no idea where any of this fit in and what the Crystal River was or any of this information. Yeah, we're supposed to teach it, but what are we teaching? I don't understand it either. Right? So they finally put the history in so we would understand the evolution of where this started, because it's where it's ending, and that's where we are now. We are facing the final point that this whole crazy history of building of the beast machine, of the warring between fallen angelic races, it all started with one problem that occurred in one matrix, and that was called originally the Borenthasala matrix. And what's interesting, for those of you who might have read Voyagers 1, there's a race called the Borenthasala, I believe they call it. they're connected with the Zetas, and they have hybrid humans running around on planet now too, and they're really cute, actually. There's a couple of them. They're like models and actresses and things. And they have a very particular Borent look to them. These aren't bad guys. These were a bioregenesis race that was taken out of what happened in this matrix. Now, this Borenthasala matrix is the Ecka level of our parallel Akasha. All right, so they were an Ecka level race, which is a core level race. They're even before in like more, I'm trying to put this in simple terms for newbies. They have more shield coding than just the simple Vecca density races. All right, so there was a race called the Borenthasala Races of our they're a natural Christic race of our parallel Akasha Ecka. Okay. They experienced witnessing a natural fall. Now, I mean natural in that, yes, fall is a consequence of making energy decisions that culminate in your loss of being able to run Christic frequency. And if you just cooperate with what the elders always explain to you in the first place, there are certain ways to behave. It has to do with love and being kind and not hoarding energy and all those things. And there's always little abuses of that as consciousness tests out how far those rules apply. Well, they watched one of those little test out things happen in their own matrix. There was, not in their Ecka level, but in their, I believe it was, what density said, I'm just learning this stuff too. In their, implosion of their density 1 through density 3 system. So they watched one Vecca quadrant in their antiparticle system go into space dust return, because something that the consciousness that was the predominant consciousness in that matrix had chose to do with the laws of energy that they were advised not to do, but they did it anyway. Now, the way it was described to me, it's written here too, and rather than just read it, I'll try to explain, because I'll get a bit more of the nuance of how they explain it to me. They were this Christic Ecka race, the Borenthasala, were so horrified by what they saw, because they loved those people. They were devastated. They knew grief, perhaps for the first time. And it created, because when you're fully online with the Christ, grief isn't even something you experience, because you experience, you know that nothing is ever lost and will always return to source. It just depends on which path they'll return. So they knew all this already, but there was a connection with this particular group of Vecca races that did go back through implosion, that the Borenthasalas couldn't let it go because they were just grief-stricken. Grief can be a very blinding thing, and it can really it can give you twisted thinking, and they began to get a bit of that, where they decided what they wanted to do was find the core of that problem is. How could something like that happen? And what is the core problem? They analyzed that down to where they realized it was competition. So then they wanted to find out, well, where does that come from? Extremes in polarity. Okay. They wanted to fix it. They wanted to, first of all, analyze extreme polarity once they had identified competition between polarity extremes as the cause of the twisted thinking that leads to the abuse of the natural laws of physics. Then they wanted to fix the Christ, and this is where they got messed up. They were Christic races. They loved the Christ. But they thought it could be even better if fall potential was eradicated, where nothing could ever fall. There was kind of like a nanny state, where there was always somebody to go and take care of you and make sure you couldn't do that. And they did know better at one point in their own evolution that fall potential occurs when certain laws of natural energy are used and abused to a point where you get consequence directly to action. All right? Consequence and action were the only temperance of the gift of free will that was put in this matrix. All right? Something could come in, and it had free will. Source gave all of us free will. And when we individuated, we had that gift, and we could use it any way we wanted to, even to the extreme of using it in opposite to divine will expression. But in order to temper and to temper the abuses that could be done with free will. Instead of Source or God sitting up there judging, you were bad, you send you to hell, that kind of stuff. That's just a child's story, all right? What was set in motion with the eternal life Christ code that allows for the natural creation and recreation to continually occur was the action, the part of energy dynamics that has to do with action and consequence, where there are certain consequences to certain actions, consequences in energy and consciousness. And falls result from a buildup of abuses of the natural laws of energy of the Christ that culminate in consequences of energy that create the fall condition. So it isn't something terrible or bad. It is actually what allows eternal life creation to be eternal, because it tempers free will. And free will needs to be tempered, because once you get out in the hologram and you're no longer directly floating around without form in Source as part of Source directly, you're still in the manifest body of Source, and you're still made of the units of consciousness of God. But you can get really lost in holograms out here. Forget who you are, forget what the rules are, and you can make some really bad mistakes. That's how fall races end up fall races. So what the Borenthasalas tried to do was, because they were so devastated by the loss of those they loved, and they used to understand why fall potential was there and absolutely essential to the functioning of the Christ code itself. So the perpetual motion of the regenerating light body would continually be there, and nothing could abuse it so badly that it wouldn't kick in with its own immune system and create consequences and energy that would stop whatever was trying to eat it alive. Like if a black hole got to a certain level, it will experience consequences, and it will be implosion. And then what was in that black hole will go on back to Source as units of consciousness of Source, as particle, space dust, on the next natural inhale or adashi cycle. So everything goes home, nothing is ever lost, and Source understands it that way. It is a loving system, and it is something that the Borenthasalas lost track of understanding through the grief they experienced by watching it in operation in their own Ecka-Veca system. And what they tried to do, they decided they were going to do a quarantined experiment in extreme polarities. First of all, they wanted to find out the ins and outs and all the nuances of how this thing called competition for resource, competition for energy, violence, how does this happen? How does something that starts out Christian get so twisted that it can behave that way? So they began what was called the Great 6666 Quarantined Polarity Experiment in their matrix. What they did, let's see, I'll probably read this here. They said, this is how they described it in official, written terms. This was in terms of Earth time translation. It would be 480 billion years ago. All right, the Borenthasala races of the Ecka in our parallel Akasha witnessed the organic fall and implosion of the density 3 through 1, density 1, Ecka-Veca quadrant within their Ecka-Veca system. Blinded by grief, the Borenthasala initiate the Great 6666 Quarantined Polarity Experiment in attempt to discover the root cause of de-evolution and improve upon the eternal life Christ code first creation program in order to eradicate fall potential. Bad idea to start with, but when you're brokenhearted and have a hard time seeing through your tears, I guess you could go there. And I guess there are people here who probably go there, because it's almost like this is a lesson we need to learn, because we're watching one. And when we get out, if we get out, we'll be watching it from that kind of perspective. It would be a good idea to realize it's not as merciless as it appears to be, no matter how much grief you're blinded by. Because if you get blinded by grief, you can do things that you really meant well in doing, but they can go really, really bad in ways you never expected. And that's what happened here. They created this polarity experiment. The Ecka Borenthasala Races first devised the Victimizer Game program. Kind of like cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, that kind of stuff. You play the bad guy, I play the good guy. Right? They were going to do it in a quarantine system. I believe they went into their density 4. They went from the Ecka into density 4 and 3 to do this experiment. It was supposed to be quarantined within Yeah, and this is in the parallel Akasha again. It was supposed to be quarantined only in the upper densities, a small area of the upper densities of their Vecca system in one Vecca quadrant. So they created the game program, the VV game program. You play the victim, I play the victimizer. Let's see where that goes. But it was meant to be fair, where it would flip. You'd have 6 cycles of victim-victimizer. The next 6 cycle would be victimizer-victim, which means they'd switch places. Whatever group was the victim in the first cycle would be the victimizer in the next. And then it was supposed to flip back again twice, where you'd have, say, group A is the victim and B the victimizer. Then you have group B is the victim, then group A is the victim, then group B is the victim, where they each get 2 cycles, 2 6 cycles, of experiencing what it meant, what it felt like to be on that side of a polarity. They didn't take somebody from someplace else to do this with. They took their own Ecka group that wanted to do this experiment and divided them up into 3 camps. One would be the control camp that would retain sanity and retain a natural, what's called tri-Vecca code. All right, their natural genetic matrix would be built on a tri-Vecca. Now, for new people, that means just imagine instead of 2 circles together, you have 2 circles together plus a third. It's the natural configuration, the natural trinity configuration of Partakai units. It is the natural Christic creation code program, or core program, is built on tri-Vecca light units. And all gene codes that are Christic are built on tri-Vecca light units. What they did, and here's where this part of what later became the beast machine evolved from, was they kept their normal control group with its natural tri-Vecca coding. And then the other 2 groups of themselves, one did, and I don't know how they did here, you raise hands, you want to play victim or victimizer first, you know, that kind of thing, but they agreed. They were doing this with themselves. You know, we'll put ourselves right in the line of fire and experience this, and then come back out and we'll know the solution, we'll know how to fix the crust. Yeah, well, they built, now these decisions are being made in the Ecka level, right? They're agreeing to incarnate in a controlled situation out of the Ecka into the density levels of density 4 and density 3. And they're going to put that little experiment there. And theoretically, they've heard that you could lose track of yourself once you got into density forms. But it was a theory, you know, kind of like read it in a book somewhere. But yeah, maybe, maybe not. We'll find out. That's why the control group was there. All right, the control group was meant to make sure if the polarity extremes, you know, went nuts or something, and they were losing their own, that the one with the tri-Vecca coding was meant to pull them both back out. And, you know, it had the code that they could hybridize with them, and in one generation, bring them right back around where they wouldn't have the mutation anymore. Because how they studied polarity was creating 2 race lines of their own, modifying them genetically to a bi-Vecca code, which means they took the 3rd element of the trinity out. And they gave one a dominant charge and one a passive charge. So they had extremes in gender polarity. They had extremes in energy running capacity. And they didn't foresee how bad it was going to get. It wasn't all put here, but earlier they'd given me several pages of scribbled stuff about a month ago on explaining this much about what became the Borenthasala races. In this polarity experiment, the Borenthasalas broke themselves into 2 groups. The name of the other polarity group doesn't matter, the one that took the victim stance, but the one that took the aggressor stance were called the Borenthasala. All right, the Borenthasala were the ones who started with, they'd be the victimizers here, not here, here, not here. Well, they got to here. And the Borenthasala strain of the Borenthasalas got so lost so fast, these guys didn't know what to do with it because they couldn't even hear them anymore. They couldn't, you know, when they were trying to like telepath to them, like to guide them, they completely shut off. But what they did have was a density 3 and 4 level of awareness. And they created a time rip technology. Now this is before wormholes. Wormholes are much more stable. They're much more constructed. But there are ways to blast holes with frequency through the light body structure of matrices or through a quarantine fence. And they developed on their own, with the intelligence that they did have, a crude but very effective time rip technology. The Borsche group destroyed the other group, the victim group. There was no time for a flip to occur, almost like a, you blow a whistle, everybody sit in your chairs, okay, now you change roles. There was no time. They hit 3 6s. They did 1 6 cycle with the Borgia dominant, another where the Borgia went passive, and they dealt so poorly with being on the victim side of it that by the time they got back to being the victimizers again, that was it. They weren't going to see the next victim cycle. So here in the 6th of there should have been 4 6 cycles. They ended up with 3 6 cycles, and right there in the end of the 6th cycle, they broke out of the quarantine. They destroyed the other race completely. They broke out of the quarantine force field of the density 4 and density 3 system and spread like a wildfire virus. They took out the control group. They very rapidly caused the fall of the entire Ecka-Veca. Not the Ecka-Veca, but the Ecka-Veca. And while this was occurring, because it's our parallel Ecka-Veca, we're neighbors, right? Our system in our Ecka-Veca with our Ecka-Veca systems are neighbors. The time rip that they use to rip all the way through their Ecka-Veca system to literally take the whole thing into black hole fall created an unnatural rip. It was almost like an accident, but it ripped into our Ecka just a little bit, just enough. Because if you were watching from another Veca, like the Aquari were, right? The Aquari actually were watching from their Ecka-Veca. Now, this was happening over here. Our living system was here, and it had already been seeded 950 billion years ago. The last life wave of our founders' races came out from our Ecka and were put into our Veca systems. So this was going along naturally here. These guys had a total blowout of the Ecka-Veca system, and that blowout created a very unstable rip between our Ecka core and what became the Borgia black hole. All right, that created a condition for everybody else who's watching, going, uh-oh. They saw how fast the time rip technology had taken out their Ecka-Veca system, and fast in terms of cosmic years. All right, I mean, it's a blink of an eye as far as what some eternal races experience as time passage. All right, the quarantine broke 480 billion years ago, right? By 450 billion years ago, the whole matrix had fallen, and and the time rip had come in to our Ecka system. So that's quite a lot of billions of years, but it's short for something like this to occur. I mean, if something for say a raider race to take a time rip technology and develop it enough where you could take out this much of the natural light body structure, it usually doesn't happen. It was a learning experience for everyone involved. What was done when it started, because the Aquari groups saw what was happening during this period. They knew it was going so fast they weren't going to be able to stop it. But what they were hoping to be able to do is quarantine it in that system until the next starfire cycle on the Ecka-Veca level, where it would be cut loose, be its own system, and it couldn't hurt anything. But because of the rip into our system, if they had tried to quarantine it, now the Aquari, again, here's the adjacent Ecka-Veca, and here's the parallel adjacent Ecka-Veca. All right, the parallel adjacent Ecka-Veca are where it's the Aquarion matrix. These guys were close enough to do something about it, but far enough to not get sucked into it, basically. And the E-LAi-sa, or E-LAi matrix, was here, and that didn't have a black hole in it yet. So these guys got together with the founders races and the Ecka level races, with our E-LAi and our Adene races and the Ecka-Veca levels, to form what was called a tri-matrix, 1 matrix, 2 matrix, 3 matrix coalition. It was called the Crystal River Cooperative. And what they were going to do was, what they wanted to do then, but they couldn't because of the rip into our Ecka, was they wanted to use the combined frequencies of their 3 crystal spirals to create enough frequency to create a seal on the Borgia black hole system. It would be stronger than what they had learned how to amplify and bend with their time rip technology. It would have been fine, and they would have got this all over with then, if it hadn't been for the accidental rip and link that occurred into our Ecka. Because if they had quarantined the Borgia black hole then, it would have sent us back to immediate space dust. I say us, but most of us weren't even part of this drama at this point. You know, we angelic humans did not exist at this point. Yeah, this was way before. We're talking, you know, like 480 billion years ago through 450 billion years ago. So instead, they took the long way around. In order to let the life field that had been set into our Akasha and Ecka-Veca system 950 billion years ago, there's lots of life field here. There was a lot of consciousness here and doing well and that kind of thing. Instead of having them all end up going back as space dust just to seal that, that rip, what they decided to do was several things, but they formed the Crystal River Coalition. There would be a time. There would come a time when it could be done. Now, they did a whole bunch of interesting things, like doing hybridization experiments. Not experiments even, they were hybridization plans in order to, first they had to get, the Aquari were the leaders of this. The Aquari level of the hub level of the Aquari matrix, right? That's the inner, you have the core, the inner, the middle, and the outer domains. The Aquari word goes with the outer domain races that were seeded into the outer domains from two races of the Aquarian matrix. Their hub races, which are the aqueous races, and their edonic middle domain races, which are called the aquiferi. The aquiferi and the aqueous got together and created a race line of their kind for the outer domains first there, and they did this in cooperative with that trimatrix Crystal River cooperative. All right, they seeded first their own outer domains into the outer domains of the Aquari matrix, and it became, like in shorthand, the Aquari matrix. It's actually the Aquarian matrix, which would be the parallel adjacent Akasha. The E-LAi then hybridized with some of them and brought them in to the outer domains of the E-LAi matrix. And then they were also brought in through some branches of our founders' races into our Ettore and Adore matrix. When I refer to Ettore and Adore, I'm referring to, again, there is what is called in a Vecca system, you know, it's not even here, in the 4 quadrants of a Vecca. You have the Ecka core. There's also, you could call the flip side of the same creation. It has to do with different angular rotational particle spin, etc. But there are 2 twin flames that form the cores of Ekkas. So you end up with 2 Ekkas born out of the same seed. One has certain characteristics of polarity and frequency, one has the other. So when I talk about Ettore, I'm talking about the side that our universal 15-dimensional time matrix is in, and the Adore side, which is in the same place as we are, but a different angular rotation of particle spin. The Ettore-Adore system is our twin flame system in our Akasha's Ecka-Veca system. So anyway, what I'm trying to fill in here, because I don't want to lose forever and ever the understanding of the people who cared enough to come that might be new to this work. All right, I'm also going to here we go, heat flashes. All right, excuse me. Can you take this for 2 seconds? Yeah, time for the striptease again. It gets unbearable when the frequencies start coming in and the wave, my back goes stiff, and the heat goes up. Not yet. No, thank you. Now, all of this history and just at least beginning to understand where these names fit is important to what we're dealing with right here and right now. Right? We have the Aquari line people coming from the parallel adjacent Akasha. We have us over here in our Akasha and our now falling Ecka-Veca system. And we have still the viable portions of the E-LAi matrix that didn't fall black hole. Now there's a whole history here that I may touch on a little bit later. All right, yeah. There's an activation coming through. Something's going on. Yeah, they're going to let me know in a minute. Oh, and by the way, if you're new here, we get this on occasion. It's like, oh, hold on a second, what? Right? Because live things will come through, and they kind of keep us updated that way. But for now, I will go on with what I was trying to talk about. We've got our Aquari brothers here. There's a whole lineage that evolved. I will probably just try to read it, and if I'm going to do that, I should probably read it off the paper copy. Do we have a paper copy? Yes. Okay. I will do that because it will be easier than me trying to bend myself in half, reading here and then flipping another Mylar. I will read you what they gave me today as far as where these race lines fit. we got to where the first mess happened, and it had to do with the great experiment, the great polarity experiment. This is where we ended up with the 666 part of the Metatronic beast machine, which came later. These events are what caused later the fall of Metatron, the fall of the Wiesadek and Wiesadrack matrices, and the fall of a part of the outer domain Aquari races from the Wiesadek, matrix, which became the Equari races. And the Equari races then broke through into our Ecka-Veca and hybridized with one of our fallen Seraphi groups called the Omicron Draconians and created what are called the Dragon Line races that exist here and that are very, very intertwined with the angelic human and, well, now they're entwined with the angelic human gene code.